you're losing valuable resources in order to gain the qualitative data. It might be the case, for example, that you feel a certain sense of camaraderie has built between you and the participant. There is a sense in which I didn't really know Mary that well before, but we've talked 1 or 2 times, we've gone out to eat once, and now we're building a much better rapport between herself and me. And I feel like, though she might have said initially that she didn't want it recorded, that there might be some added benefit in me recording it. So let me just ask her again, because I feel comfortable enough with the participant. Hey Mary, remember, I remember on the 15th, based on my notes, you said you didn't want us to, you don't want me to use a recorder during the interview. Is that still the case, or how do you feel about that now? Has that changed? And the reason why I ask is blah 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 blah. Hey Jason, you know what? No, I think that'd actually be good based on what I think you're going to do with this research and these findings. Sure, it's not a problem. Or yeah, I still don't want you to, right? So the idea is, the relationship between you and your participant is one that is continually evolving. And what you want to do is, whatever terms were met in order to facilitate the interview process, you want to make sure that those terms, those negotiated terms, if any, are revisited continually throughout the research, right? So, pretty simple. Next point is very, very important, so much so that I created its own subsection. The idea is known as member checking, right? The idea is member checking. And much to my surprise, I went through, in preparing this lecture series and the notes for this, I went through and I cross-referenced my notes on Qualitative Methods 1, the first installment of this. Totally separate lecture series, but the first installment of Qualitative Methods. And I looked for member checking in my notes. I sort of did control find, member checking, member, couldn't find anything. So much to my surprise, I didn't discuss member checking to my knowledge at all in the first lecture series. So now that we're in the second half of qualitative and the ethical concerns, I want to discuss that. So, as a researcher, I am going to compile my findings. Right? I'm going to compile my findings, and my findings are going to have some set of information. Now, obviously, in order for me to compile my findings, the compilation of my findings happens after the interview process with the participant, right? Obviously, I can't report findings until I've at least interviewed my participants. So, here's my participant. And this is me, the researcher. So, I've had my interview, I've collected the data, we recognize that I have an indirect relationship to the life story of the participant. I've collected my data and I have my findings. What member checking is I take my findings and I re-present, right? I re-present. They presented the information to me, obviously. They know the facts of their life. Their life story was, once upon a time I did this, then I did this happened, here's how we resolved this. They present that information to me. I take their narrative, I code it, I present my findings, I have a pretty thorough draft of what the final product is going to look like, and then I take my findings back to represent the findings with my interpretation infused in it, right? Here's their initial presentation. So this is the presentation of the participant. The representation has the researcher's interpretation. So it's part researcher interpretation. It's part researcher interpretation and part initial narrative. Right? So part of the initial narrative will be in the representation, but the new part, the new bit that has been added to the presentation is the interpretation of the researcher. So I, as researcher, say, Mary told me that this is what happened in '82, and here's how her relationship to, some phenomena, whistleblowing. She was a whistleblower. Here's how her relationship to the phenomena of whistleblowing unfolded. Conceptually discussing the notion of whistleblowing is important. Why? Because it shows that there is a mechanism in place to self-police, those in positions of power, blah, blah, blah. Hey, Mary, is that basically what you were saying? I never really thought of it like that. I didn't think what I did was that. Yeah, I really appreciate what you've done. That's exactly what I meant. I didn't have the ability, I don't have the analytic training to say what you said, but that's exactly what it was, right? I saw myself in a position of subordination, and despite the fact that all I had was my voice and all that I could do in lieu of all of the systemic powers that be was to sort of rat out somebody or blow the whistle and call the authorities in the investigation, blah, 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 blah. Yes, that's what it was. Just as an idea, right? So what happens in the process of representing your findings to the individual participant is that the participant has the opportunity at that point to basically give you the final seal of approval, to sort of be ghetto, right? So the participant says, in fact, I'll validate your findings. Your findings are correct, right? Obviously, I wouldn't have said it the way that you said it. I don't have the training that you have, so I can't say it the way that you say it. But yes, I like what you said. Actually, I want to pause right there. It's not that I like what you said, but that what you said is accurate. It's important, on a quick side note, because I just had this experience, so just to infuse this here, it's important that you recognize, at least this is my take, other qualitative researchers might disagree with me on this, it's important that you recognize in validating the findings via member checking, right, so this is member checking, through the process of, right, and that's a check sign, not a V. So through the process of member checking, it's important that you recognize when presenting the findings to the participant, this is the conclusion of your research relationship, it's not a matter of whether the participant likes or dislikes what's said, right? It's not a preferential thing, it really isn't, right? There isn't a sense in which the participant can say that, I don't really like that you said this. It's not about what the participant, you're going to have to phrase this in a manner that's sort of conducive and isn't as aggressive or abrasive as what I'm saying now. But I'm not educating participants, I'm educating researchers. So the point is, it's not a matter of their preference, right? It's not a matter of preference because they're not writing the research unless you're doing participatory action research, right? Or some other forms of research. This is my interpretation. What you want to make sure is that you got their story and the emphasis that they placed in various parts of their story correct. Hey, Mary, remember when you told me about your first, with the stress that you had with reporting whatever you discovered to the authorities, remember you said this, and you might quote what she says, was that accurate? Was I accurate in addressing the fact that that was a very important moment for you? Oh yeah, that was important, right? This might, and also when you go into member check, I always go in member checking with my audio running, and I let them know this, obviously, right? My audio is going to be running. Why? Because insofar as now you have, and this is time intensive, but you can get some amazing research done like this. Insofar as you give the participant now, after you've processed your information, you've coded your information, you've identified a narrative theme, you've incorporated some methodological discourse in there, and you present a pretty thorough draft back, not a full draft, but a section, a page or two, 3 pages of what they said, and you go back and forth with the participant, it might trigger a more profound understanding of their own action, right? Remember, as I said before, qualitative methods research isn't really, as far as I'm concerned, it's superficial to think about answering questions like why. Why did you do X? Yeah, it's a valid question in qualitative methods research, sure. Why did participant A do X, whatever X might be? A much more profound question is, what were the conditions that led you to do that, right? What happened in your environment? What happened mentally, quietly to yourself? What happened interpersonally, interculturally, spiritually, religiously, educationally, that led you to perform action X? If we're talking, for example, about whistleblowing, it might be, and this is just off the top of my head, if we're talking, for example, about whistleblowing, it might be the sense that, I didn't get the discourse during the first interview with the person, but as part of my member checking, the whistleblower might look back and be like, I recognize that I was putting myself at risk, and my family at risk, and my life at risk, and maybe not my life at risk, but my career at risk, and so on. And I didn't really realize